October 30th, Halloween's Eve, thought the impatient Evan as he stood on his tiptoes to glimpse through his sole grimy window. Life in the Welsh countryside simply didn't have the doors to knock on, nor the homes to give him sweets, but that was fine, because Evan's family had an even better holiday. They'd hear the family van pull up onto the muddy driveway, this time every month, and in his dad would come with a big cheesy grin on his face like he was Father Christmas. Evan was 12 now, and yet the only faces he would see day to day were his father, Tristan, his lanky brother Lowry, and the customers of the family burger van that we towed across the moors. His dad would be home any minute now in that bright, silly vehicle, smelling like meat and tomato sauce. The last Saturday of the month was when his big Dar would bring home something real special to compensate. The other time Dad skived work early, just so they could all sit round the dinner table and eat dinner together. It meant the world to him. And there he was now. Lowry's hurried feet came rushing from the other room as we both went to the door. But something was different. Lowry could sense it too. The seconds before their dad entered were unsettlingly silent. Wrong. The door swung open, revealing a gaunt figure, carrying what remained of a middle-aged woman, his face splattered with blood, and the carcass severed like she were roadkill. He held a woman in pieces. The torn midriff hung limply. "Who's hungry, my darlings?" chimed Tristan with that signature grin, teeth bared. Evan couldn't believe it. She was dead. He'd only gone and gutted her already. "Oh, don't give me that look, boy! You wouldn't believe the legs on this one!" He looked at the hanging legs, or what was left of them. "Now, she's not half heavy, so grab your dad's tools and join me in the shed," said Tristan. "What's wrong, Evan?" "Smile, son." "He's just sulking because the gutting's his favourite part," replied Lowry. "I'm gutted more like," said the boy, with an exaggerated pout. Tristan kicked up the carpet as to avoid any droplets of blood. That meant she could still be fresh after all, thought Evan. With a gleam in his eye, he brought the saw. Of all the houses Evan had lived in over the last 15 years, this current den was the best. Dad said the shed was a converted butcher's from the 50s, that he'd converted back upon needing somewhere to prepare meals like this. In the middle of nowhere, their dinners would go by uninterrupted. There was no mercy or grace needed with that meat knife. It came down with the heavy smack that he'd use on steak or beef patties. "That's all she is now, son. Meat," he said plainly. The preparation of human meat required quite the skill set. It was one he'd had drummed into him back in the village. If he'd picked up the craft, you simply weren't one of them. Lowry brought in the mincer from the van and dropped the machinery on the floor. Tristan rifled through the remaining innards with an arched eyebrow. This last was no good. Clogged arteries and grey, discoloured organs. Tristan used the moment to remind his boys to never smoke, for fear of having the same happen to them. She was fresh, only downed on the forest trail nearby, but in his soft heart he couldn't help but feel deflated. Another long work month for another spoiled moment. Second-grade meat. His boys didn't deserve second-grade meat. Even the dim-witted Lowry didn't seem particularly engaged. In some ways he understood. By their age he was already being trusted to carry out the hunt himself. He'd grown up with a whole village, an entire community that would get in on the hunt. It was their tradition. It was fun. Tristan took pride in being a good dad. He hadn't yet told the boys that it was soon time to move on to another home, yet again to avoid attracting attention. He knew how that had crushed their wee spirits further. It was time to bust out the big guns. "Here, how long has it been since Shangri-La?" "The holiday camp," said Lowry. They'd stayed overnight when they first arrived in the area. "Yes, there'll be a lot of menu of folks there," said Tristan with a dark smirk. "Imagine it." The boys audibly cheered.
October 30th, South Wales, 1986, read the front of a nostalgia tour shuttle bus. Bran Tamrathine Passamir Miliar Mer Slitheen squinted his sideway eyes reading the alien symbols decorating the tourist pamphlet. He couldn't tell whether it was a language unknown to him or whether the font was just that garish. Hello, Green Sir. Just to remind you that all human disguises, holoforms and flesh suits must be worn before we set off. From this point on, it's the crazy 80s, all the way to Shangri-La, hollered the ginger tollmaster, doing his little jig. Bran sighed and opened his suitcase, revealing the human skin suit he'd prepared earlier. A portly man from the travel agency named Leslie. As expected, the suit didn't fit in all the ways that mattered. The looming Slitheen cursed as he stepped up onto the bus steps to find the skin instantly beginning to ride up in the groin area. In the back were a myriad of different species, wearing the worst human tourist disguises imaginable. From smell alone, Bran could make out a pair of Nostrovites, a rowdy pack of Zygons, some Orbatine, a little lone Grask trying to climb up onto his seat, and a Hoix. Who was he fooling? Why is it that there's less and less foot space every time I travel? Grumbled Bran. He had barely managed to slide himself into a window seat before the bus had begun singing songs. At this late point in the evening, Bran was too exhausted to even bother slitting their throats. He put in his earpieces and blasted ELO's Xanadu as loud as he could to dull them out. Take your work leave, Grandmother of the Tall Trees had said. Come for your holiday, they said. Scout their business set up and report back to us is what they'd really meant. Oh, he spoke their language, all right. The travel industry had been booming in that quadrant following that scrumptious little plague. Bran still wasn't sure exactly which plague it had been referring to, or if they even knew what decade they'd booked. Shangri-La had been put on the map ever since word spread of those awful Bannermen getting their humiliating comeuppance by the local residents, which made for great promotion. Nobody liked going on holidays to Bannerman planets. The family excuse to send him on the trip was the silver anniversary of his first hunt. He doubted this to be the case. His entire extended family had forgotten the date of his birthday every year since he was young. Instead, 2 months early, he'd received discount coupons from the cheapskates to a grotty holiday camp on Earth. Wales at that. In the 80s at that. Bran was no stranger to Earth history, though. He loved the music, but the chart showed that the alien invasions in the 20th century all ended in tears. It was a bad business move. Not that anybody in the family listened to his charts, of course. Sharp fingers and all sorts of pies back there. The tollmaster bounced onto the bus to an annoying round of applause. He escorted an elderly creature to the seat next to the burly Slitheen. A trio of conjoined women bundled up next to him. They all shared one spine, which gave one head a thankless task as they sat back. Bran wondered if this was a trick, a way for his family to dispose of him once and for all. Bran's duties lied in backroom dealings and admin. How many years had it been since his last hunt with his family? Did they even care? Didn't bear thinking about. Bran closed his eyes as the tollmaster gave his loud theatrical spiel up front, drifting off back to dreams of David Bowie, mathematical graphs, and the Disneyland on Clom. How Bran had wished he could have gotten off at one of Earth's Disneylands. At least there could have been some fun scaring tourists in the dark. He smiled in his sleep, thinking about how much blue light spilled out to the haunted mansion. It would have been easy pickings. He awoke to the touch of a withered old hand. "We've arrived, dearie," said the 3 old wenches next to him, shaking him awake. Bran snapped to his senses and saw patches of grass and tarmac outside. The arched sign above him read Shangri-La, in a style and rundown quality not dissimilar to Disneyland Clom. His playlist titled Human Music looped round to the beginning again. Xanadu, your neon lights will shine for you, Xanadu, he thought.
Tristan sped down the winding Welsh roads as fast as his tired van would take him, with only his dipped headlights illuminating the dark road. Strolling into the holiday camp would be easy on paper. From his last trip, he'd noted the general lack of rules in the place. People came and went without even checking in if they were regulars, which meant nobody kept the books. Maybe he could snag a teenager. split off from their parents, a drunken woman staggering back to her room from the bar, a big fat tourist gluttoned up with a funny accent. Whoever he snagged, he had to be fast. The sun had set hours back and it was already past Evan's bedtime, the little tyke. Half an hour later, he parked amongst some caravans and prepared his kit. One hunter's knife, one butcher's knife, and a twin-barreled shotgun handed down to him by his father. It was the one item in his possession he kept clean and free of rust. He'd earned it with his first kill. To not be viewed as prey in that village, he'd been given a week to hunt and prepare his first kill, undetected up the mountains of the Aberystwyth Common. It was a rite of passage, and one his boys would surely undergo themselves one day, if they wanted to handle this shotgun themselves. If they wanted to go through life being more than just prey, to enjoy the strength of putting your own food on the table, to provide for a family, to taste the red-hot adrenaline of the hunt and come out on top, Tristan left the van and took to the covered forest, from where he could circle the site to find his dinner, or failing that, a map.
1 hour in, and Bran had already gotten himself into mischief. He found himself joining the Zygon party for late-night gambling. The 5 of them were noticeably young. Even in their adult human forms, it was clear that they were on a gap year from their colony. He could tell from the mannerisms and especially the smells. Bran found himself inebriated quickly, surprised by how much of an effect beer had on him. As he loosened his skin suit over the course of the game, it was fine. He was amongst shapeshifters here. By the time the game was over, he'd sung along to Zygonian sea shanties and begun telling them his life story. What he'd give for a year away from the family, he spoke. How under the current operation, he had no clue when his next bit of time off would come, he told them drunkenly. And all about how upper management were experimenting with hot desking. Oh, and that Bruce Colmer passing midday Slitheen from accounting? That sounds arduous, said one, listening intently. Have you considered challenging your family to public combat? Said another. My gene pool were all chosen for sacrifice to the Merca, said the one opposite Bran. I guess you always choose your own family in the end, he said solemnly, finishing his drink. They were a fun lot, even when they taunted him with vinegar from a nearby burger van. At some point in the night, Bran remembered he'd killed a fellow guest because he liked the look of his tropical shirt. The Zygons had looked at each other sheepishly at first, but soon found the humour in it. The shirt fit the Slitheen's human disguise perfectly, even if it was out of season. After a few more rounds, they found the dead man's spouse and child searching around the camp for him. The boldest and drunkest Zygon of the bunch simply put his red barnacled finger to his lips and said, "Watch this." The others all stifled their giggles as he approached the widow in the form of her dead husband and told her he was about to run off with a finer breed of female. The camp had a cafe, a small tennis court, a front desk with a little shop, a block of flats, a block of toilets, and a dance hall equipped with a bar. They managed to find alcohol in most of these venues. In the dance hall, the shuttle bus driver bought Bran something called a gin and tonic, with intentions to get Bran out of his skin suit in a very intimate manner. Not used to flirting, the driver found herself with a poisoned dart in the front of her neck. She slumped onto the bar as if asleep. Mixed human beverages were starting to mingle in the Slitheen's stomach, and soon he found himself excreting less than subtle farts. The Zygons loved this new noise. It was midway through the fart recital of Bohemian Rhapsody that Bran realised just how free he felt. Repressing himself and keeping it all in for decades of his life. It felt right. It felt good. It was a fart anthem of liberation, but one that the Zygons didn't appreciate by the end as the smell accumulated. Half of the party split off to go looking for females. A very different kind of hunt indeed. As Bran groggily waved goodbye to his new friends, he noted that the tallest had kept his Freddie Mercury form on without realising, but the others either found it too funny to tell him, or were too drunk to notice. Mercury was still active in this time period, Bran noted, so it's probably fine for the web of time or whatever. Emboldened by his new farting breakthrough, Bran plucked the keys from the dying driver and took the Nostalgia Tour shuttle bus for a joyride with the boys. It wasn't the most intoxicated driving lesson he'd ever had, nor the deadliest. It helped Earth cars were much simpler than anything he'd piloted before. Raxacoricofallapatorian land vehicles were mostly made of angry fauna, so it was much more fun to drive a machine that wouldn't bite you with poisonous venom whenever you crashed, which Bran and the Zygons did a lot.
Upon getting a map from reception, Tristan had figured that his best bet would be to stalk the greens behind the tennis court. It was out of the way and distant from most of the crowds. Naughty teenagers coming for a smoke or some action were bound to exit the dance hall and fall into his range eventually. The karaoke open mic night happened inside was sure to obscure any gunshot sounds or stifled screams if he played it smart. A quick, clean kill to bring a smile to those kids' sweet faces. It was just a matter of stealth.
Wow! Human weaponry! Stun me! Stun me!
He spun around, pointing the barrel at what appeared to be Queen vocalist Freddie Mercury looking down at him.
Guys, come look!
Shouted the Freddie lookalike, again to his friends away behind him. He was about to blow his cover. Tristan acted in the moment, letting his adrenaline guide his actions. He grabbed the hunting knife from the inside of his jacket, swooped at the man's neck with an arm lock and stabbed the blade into his neck in one swift movement. Quickly, before the others came, he dragged himself and his victim into the foliage. There was no time to retrieve the shotgun, meaning it was left out on full display.
Brecon! Brecon! Where's that infernal human shagger gotten to?
Called the other Zygon. There were two of them. Tristan's heart hammered in his chest. Could he grab the gun in time before they saw? Could he take two drunken men without alerting more attention? The two approached and stopped on the path to stare at the gun on the floor. The hunter gripped his knife, anticipating the worst. He held his breath and tried to get a closer look at their faces and builds from behind the bushes. In that moment, he spotted a glint of orange entering his peripheral. The stabbed body beneath him began to morph. The face of a young Freddie Mercury unfolded into a horrifying, crusty beak. Tristan felt a cold chill in his heart, mixing with a hot adrenaline as he found himself inches away from the corpse of an orange octopus monster. Tristan screamed. Diving out of the bush, he grabbed his gun and aimed it at the two men. The two men were now also octopi. The world has filled with octopus monsters now, appearances too horrifying to be Halloween costumes. He reacted the only way he knew how in his blind panic and fired rounds into each of them before running away in terror. He was still the hunter. Not prey. Never prey.
The beer sure had a potent effect on Bran's Raxacoricofallapatorian metabolism, but it was a drunken thrill that seemed to pass over all too quickly. Bran was getting old, and his partying days were most definitely behind him. Having lost the others, he returned to the dance hall and held an abandoned glass of ice to his sore head. Be it a fast hangover, or a result of the car crash, Bran's head killed. The bus driver from earlier still lied on the bar where he'd left her. Bran apologized by returning the keys to her smashed bus into her coat pocket. It seemed that he'd stumbled onto the open mic slot of the evening. A human family were coming to the end of a loud pop duet, which didn't help the headache. Musically, they were good though, and appeared to be actual genuine humans, completely unaware of their alien audience. Next up was a sad man in a vest, whose act seemed to be tapping spoons on the bald head of another alien holidaymaker. The sad beige clown drummed away with his little spoons to himself until the song came to a merciful end. Then he began to speak.
Hello, ladies and gentle Cybermen.
He boomed into the mic, somehow managing to roll R's into a sentence that didn't even have any. The joke bombed.
Do you have any Camerons in the audience tonight, or anyone green, really?
At this, the alien audience became antsy, looking around the room at the other guests.
Now, memories might fade. People may leave you. Places will be grey.
He sung into the mic.
But the colours of this place, they stay. They will remain the same.
Was it a song? Spoken word poetry? It was weird. He looked around. The wallpaper had deteriorated beyond colour. What could be seen through the dim light bulbs and smoke was a run-down, sad carpet, and unfortunate inhabitants of the late 80s. Raxacoricophalopatorians knew the 80s, of course. Everybody in the civilized galaxy knew the Bangles and Flock of Seagulls. But Bran felt genuine pity for anyone who found nostalgia in this putrid little hole. The alcohol was good, but in his hangover, Bran thought to himself, how sad was it that Galantian legend Rick Astley came from such a run-down era like this. The little drunk Scotsman on stage continued ranting away to the slow melancholy of the spoon-tapping.
But places have flavors. Decades have taste. And music will never leave you.
He hollered, roaring out of his tiny lungs. Such a lonely, defeated face. Under his yell, Bran heard 2 gunshots in the far distance. The other aliens, seemingly unaware of the sound, politely clapped as the drunk Scotsman wandered off stage. Maybe they thought that was part of his performance. Maybe they thought that was a strange human tradition. Where was Bowie? Jeff Wayne? The Earth was such a little planet. They surely were around the place somewhere. Next up on the mic were the triad of conjoined old biddies from the bus. Their terrible disguise on full display as they took to the stage to announce the results of that evening's raffle. The cringing Slitheen moved on from the bar, desperate in search of something else to do. Maybe he'd find the artist David Bowie's geo-coordinates in this terminal and find one of his shows in person. Maybe he'd pay him a visit and be David Bowie for the week. But no Black Star then, thought Bran. The terminal was now emitting annoying digital music. Bullseye, pub quiz, it read, with enter £2 credits flashing on the screen beneath it. Now this, he understood. Slitheen knew few things better than money. Slitheen knew few things in general, Bran thought. The terminal made a happy sound as it ingested the coins and showed him the image of an animated dancing cow. The electronic machine was definitely from a different decade, but he'd figured earlier that a lot of the tech from around was imported by the Nostalgia Tours company. The screen now posed a question. In what year did Earth's first contact with extraterrestrials take place? As shown in the picture below, the cartoon cow asked him. It was the unmistakable image of a Slitheen cruiser lying in the River Thames. It was the infamous London grifts. That bastard branch of the family had stuck him with the admin for it. It tickled him thinking of their charred ashes. His dark grin stretched out the human mask. So much for family. He looked at the options for answers. A. 1975. No, that was the Loch Ness in the Thames. B. 1986. Ice Warriors. C. 2005. And D. 2006. He paused, trying to remember the year it happened. In that exact moment of hesitation, Bran heard hurried footsteps. Someone was running towards the bar, fast, bringing a waft of sweat and fear with them. Before Bran could select the correct answer, the glass window smashed open and a speeding bullet shot through his hand. He'd been shot on holiday. Bran stared at the clean entry and exit wound quickly filling with green, sticky blood. He fell to the floor, cursing, hissing in frustration. Then another shot flew over his head, finding its mark on the conjoined Raffle sisters on stage. The middle body fell lifeless, as a bullet planted itself firmly in the old lady's head. It was then that the room descended into chaos. In the next crucial seconds, Bran crawled across the dirty floor and crouched down behind the bar for cover, finding the barman, the grask from the bus, and the sad clown man with the question-marked collar also hiding behind the barricade. 2 more shots fired. Then another. Then another.
Stay down! Someone's got a gun!
Screamed the barman, to nobody in particular. Bran inhaled and searched the room with a sense of smell. Within the scent of cheap whiskey and cigarette smoke-stained furniture was the hot release of soft brass. And behind that, the figure of stinking blood. It was a male. Middle-aged, scared out of his mind. He had the smell of both human and Zygon blood on him. Ah, now that's interesting, he said coldly.
What do? What do?
Demanded the Grask, fumbling with his wristwatch, no doubt a teleport. The four of them stayed silent as the other two Nans cried out in pain, before being swiftly silenced. That took another 2 rounds of ammo. Bran counted. Bran imagined their heads popping like ragweed pods. The gunman was now striking the door with the butt of his gun and made a shadowy entrance over the smashed drinks glasses and blood. The barman had begun to cradle himself, rocking in the corner in front of the fridge.
What do? What do?
Repeated the Grask, having no luck operating the wrist device with his thin human fingers.
Don't look at me. I'm on holiday.
Said the spoon's player in response.
Here's a novel idea.
He lay down on the floor and began to play dead. He covered his face with his hat. The 3 of them stared at him in disbelief. Bran half considered joining him and letting the whole thing play out. But tonight, just tonight, Bran felt like a whole new Slitheen. For the first time in too long, he began thinking like a hunter again. A human gun only held so many bullets. The Slitheen bit into his human hand, using its spit to sterilize the green flesh underneath. With the other, he decided to bid for time. Using his hidden mammoth strength, Bran grabbed the panicking imp next to him by the head and chucked the Grask over the bar as a distraction, right into the corner of the gunman's line of sight.
What do? What do?
Begged the Grask on the floor as it looked up to see a grim, horrified human lashing out in pure terror at the mad monster mash around him.
Tristan thought himself on the brink of madness. He'd run into the dance hall to get help, alert somebody about the horrors outside, but from the window he saw nothing but more creatures, sat in little human disguises amongst women and children. If they really were women and children. Now a tiny man was in front of him, speaking broken English. Had he done it? Had he shot all the monsters? The Grask's face glitched for half a second, just a flash of the demon underneath. Tristan emptied his gun into it. The hunters stood in the bloody hall, shaking. More people were scattered around the room, hiding the best they could. For the first time in his life, he couldn't think of his targets as prey. He was the prey all over again, just like in his youth. The monsters were hungry, they were all around him, and he was out of ammunition. "Kill or be killed," said a memory of his old father in his head. And he would. He would do just that. Then somebody farted.
"I'd thank you for putting an end to that racket,"
said a gurgling voice from behind the bar. Bran stood up, appearing to the gunman as a fat man in a Hawaiian shirt.
"Perseems you've shot my hand,"
he said with a casual menace. It was the tourist who blocked his first shot at the window. He would have made a perfect meal if he'd only been human. He could see in Bran's inhuman eyes that he was having similar thoughts.
"Oh look, the little man has run out of bullets."
Bran's stomach gurgled with hunger.
"I was wondering if this place was all-inclusive."
The Slitheen began pulling at the gun wound in his hand. Soon he was tearing the skin off completely. The last links of tissue ripped clean off of his arm as he pulled free a huge bulging limb. Bigger than the rest of its human form, the green arm stretched out 3 long sharp claws. The grin on the creature's face deepened so wide that the skin along the human mouth began to peel open. A giddy, childish laugh emanated from it. There was a monster underneath. Tristan's brain couldn't even register the fear. It simply told him to run, so he did. He dropped the gun his father had bestowed him, and in that moment succumbed to the role of prey, and no matter of speed or distance would put a stop to that.
"Now this is a holiday,"
thought the green demon as he gave chase to the night. Tree, 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 tree. The next half hour was a blurry mist of trees. Tristan was running, harder than he ever knew he could. He who had spent his whole life moving from place to place on the run. He imagined himself as a cornered rabbit, hopping for its life from a hungry wolf. Then he imagined himself as the wounded woman from early that afternoon. The middle-aged woman he chased through the woods that looked just like this. The sheer deliriousness of being chased wasn't just terrifying. He discovered it was madness-inducing. He never gave his targets more than a few minutes to escape, just until they tired themselves, but this creature, this thing had been toying with him for what felt like an hour. He could hear crumples of leaves wherever he turned his head, but the dead of night obscured any sight of the thing. He knew there was nothing around for miles. He knew there was nothing to run to. He'd run straight past his van in that forest that would persist for longer than his legs could. He finally stopped. He had to. The strain on his lungs was too much. It was only once he'd caught his breath that the blue light appeared in the darkness of the night, so close to him. The noise that accompanied it was ungodly. Out of the blue light appeared the creature that had chased him from Shangri-La. The face of the man remained intact anyway. A blue line of light emanated from his forehead as it looked down on him from an impossible height. 2 huge dinosaur-like legs supported an arched green body. At this point, it wore the skinned face of the man as a joke.
Oh, I gave you a head start. Run some more,
said the creature in a gurgled, triple-toned voice. I can't, he wept. Please, I have a family. Its claws faltered.
Oh, well, we all have families,
the creature replied as if reasoning with him. Please, let me get back to them. I'm all those 2 boys have got.
Such sincerity. Such a small family. Tell me about your boys.
They're good boys. It's meat night. He tried his best to connect words together. Evan and Lowry. It's past Evan's bedtime, he uttered mindlessly.
Oh dear,
he said with the charm of a snake. He was beginning to adopt the tone of his brothers and sisters, that venomous, patronising voice that came oh so naturally. This is what it meant to hunt. It was power, it was security, it was fun, and it was family. To him, a hunt was something a family did together. The drunk Zygon's words from earlier came back to him. It was time to choose his own family. A family holiday, perhaps.
Don't worry about your little boy, little man. I can tuck him in.
At this, Tristan grabbed his knife and went in for the kill. He struck desperately, like a cornered rat. There was no right place to strike on this looming titan, but it hardly mattered. The uncovered Slitheen had the physical advantage.
Amateur.
His final action was intercepted by the giant claw. It grabbed his knife arm in the vice and applied pressure. Applied pressure until it came off. The bloody Slitheen grinned a cruel smile before ripping away the skin around it. His face was hanging off, shed by sharp, terrible claws that glistened in the approaching moonlight. A horrific parody of a human face. The sound of loud flatulence was masked by a louder, final scream.
Oh, Bran's skin suit's in tatters, the face all torn apart. Now he'd never be able to return the skin to its original owner. In his remains, the Slitheen found a wallet. Inside the wallet was a list of geo-coordinates. All but one of the home addresses were crossed out. On him were also credits, picture of a young human boy, and oh so much skin.
Dar was late, but the promise of him pulling into the driveway with that cheesy grin was too exciting for Lowry or Evan to sleep. Lowry had prepared his father's tools and work table, and Evan had even prepared the table where they both sat. There was a knocking at the door. "It's open," said the youngest, now hoping it was his dad at the door. And it was. "Hello, boys. I'm home," smiled their father. He entered the house and looked around slowly. He sat down silently at the dirty dinner table, his smile unfaltering. The older boy came to join them, wondering where the meat was, where the van was. The younger boy was just happy to see his father back, that the 3 of them could spend what was left of the holiday together. 2 boys and their father sat at the dinner table. I think we should go hunting tomorrow. All together.